Dober dan, lepo pozdravljeni. Good afternoon, good evening. Allow me to say warm welcome to Susan Meiselas, the photographer and the author of this exhibition, which you are going to see today. I would also like to extend my warm welcome to Ambassador of United States, Mrs. Harputlian, Ambassador Harputlian, who is here together with Mateja Juric, who also contributed immensely to this project, and especially to the masterclass we did last weekend and in last 2 months, in fact, with 15 Slovenian photographers working with Slovenian communities. And I am absolutely certain that we will still hear about the outcomes of this masterclass, of this inspiration that the participants got from Susan, as well as from Lydia Matthews and Luciana Pinchiero, who are also here with us. Good evening to you as well. Susan, today I learned that you don't like speaking that much in public, even though I believe that listening to you, to your stories, to your experiences, to share your life with photography, in photography, for photography, is amazing for me. So I do believe that as a photographer, your language is not a written word or a spoken word. It probably is visual language. So I would like to know how you see the difference. What is possible to tell with photography, through photography, when you have your camera approaching people and when you also show them your photographs, when you ask them to bring their photographs to share with you. How do you connect with people through photography?
I'm going to quote you. Well, first of all, thank you, Madam Ambassador. My first time in Ljubljana, and also for Lydia and for Luciana, it was really, and we have some of our masterclass here, so you didn't get too much from us, you want more from us. It's really great that you're here too. So how can I possibly, Maria, thank you for the opportunity to get to know this community, even if it's just a little bit, without making photographs. Usually the photograph is the sort of excuse, and you've heard me say this already, but I find it, in retrospect, I realize it's been the excuse all my life to be somewhere I don't belong, and try to find a meaningful connection, and that is often through the photograph. And it could be the photographic exchange in the sense of an image being brought back to someone. It could be someone recognizing themselves in a particular setting, sharing how they see themselves. So I see the photograph as a point of intersection. It's not that it's my photograph, it's an encounter through photography in various worlds.
I think we're going to touch on this, to who the photography belongs when you take a photography. And in English language, taking photography for you probably doesn't work like that.
I prefer making than taking, and unfortunately, photography has had a history, and in understanding that history, changing the path of what photographing can be is a challenge, because there's certain, as you know, a photograph matted and framed on a wall has a certain meaning. So even breaking the code of what to expect when you go to an exhibition of photography. To what extent you expect to interact in a different way with the subjects of the photographs, or is it only about the authoring of the photograph? So all of these are questions to continuously provoke, let's say.
For me, your photography really proves that there are at least 3 persons always involved in a single photography. That would be a photographer, the subject, and of course the viewer as well. Maybe there are more people involved for sure, but basically at least 3 people, because it depends of all 3 of them, how do we read it, right? And I think it's very interesting that you started actually as an educator as well, and that you studied visual literacy for yourself first. And I think this is still, nowadays, visual literacy is still something we are really missing it from schools, children do learn how to read letters and words, they don't still learn enough to read the images. But I think for you it is like a life mission as well to make people be able to read images, to see what is behind the image, behind the photograph. So you've been involved in education a lot. What does educating people mean to you, sharing your knowledge?
It's a process, and it continues on and on and on. And so we don't have one reading of a photograph. We have multiple readings. We have multiple settings in which we're reading photographs. So it's not just, I think, in schools, it's on our phones, it's on the advertising, it's everywhere in the world in which we inhabit. And it's a challenge to, again, deconstruct and delayer the reading, So it's actually beyond the vocabulary. I mean, I'm looking through you to a photograph that obviously I made in 1978, and it had an ongoing life, which some of you might later get to see. This video is a short recording of something called Reframing History. And though I made the photograph at one point in time, I brought it back 25 years later to the community where I had made that photograph. And somebody in the photograph, the middle figure in this case, Husto, speaks about that moment in his life, at that moment of making that photograph. But of course, time moves on. So when we talk about 3 perspectives, time is the biggest perspective. So it's the remembrance of being in a photograph or making a photograph and then seeing a photograph. The photograph continues to evolve in time, and we change our own relationships to the reading of the photograph.
But it seems that you have been profoundly curious how people see themselves on your photographs, what they mean to them when you take a photograph, which we can see already from the earliest series on this exhibition. Yesterday you said those were not my subject in 1971. Those were my neighbors. Those were people who lived in the same building with you while you were studying. So you took photographs of them. But that's not all. You didn't just take photographs and show them. No, you brought them back to them and asked them opinions, how they see themselves. And this is something what I see really consistently through all your work. You're always going back to people. So this probably also opened again the question of who the photo actually belongs.
And who it's for, but it changes, and it can have many, many lives. I think it was important to distinguish. It was not only my neighbors, but many of us live where we have neighbors that we don't know. So it was a way to come to encounter my neighbors and, open up a dialogue with the neighbors in a sense.
To get to know them, to connect
with them? Know is an interesting word in English because I'm not sure how well I knew them, but it was an opportunity to have a moment of engagement. And a lot of this work is about different kinds of times of engagement. As you know, the next room is really about longer-term relationships, and this first room is more about the encounter of a photograph with a stranger. And I think in the second room I begin to have a different idea about immersing, spending time, returning, sharing the process, be it through contact sheets or over time seeing people, seeing in my case the Prince Street girls on the back wall they are evolving, so they're seeing themselves through the photographs I'm making over a few years' time. So the photograph is, again, a part of the inspirational exchange, you know, that leads you to different ideas. I know that you know this, that you will hear when you go through the space in the second room, instead of a written text, you begin to hear voices, and the voices are reflecting on the experiences people have that I'm photographing them, but I really want you to hear them and hear how they express, how they see themselves.
Yes, it's some kind of whole feeling of the series when you add also sounds, and then you also add videos. This is your practice. It became your practice, of course. Photography is the main medium, but there are also archives which are extremely important for you. So as you will see through the exhibition, each series also has the archive. Let it be like in the case of Lando, where you invited people to bring photographs and build this visual genealogy of the place where you worked, or let it be the process of the photographs you have taken. It's amazing to see, for example, with carnival strippers, all this personal correspondence with girls which you photograph, who really did feel that you are interested in them as a human. And I think it is striking to see, of course, people like carnival strippers working in conditions we probably cannot really imagine. I mean, for me it's really sad, but I cannot get lost of the comparison with a circus. Actually, carnival strippers, they were moving around with a van, and they just had their shows, right? So it's even a little bit like a human circus, isn't it? But only for men, I would say. And but you were interested in what does it mean for those women?
Well, because I was a young woman, not that different in age than they were, though I wasn't looking for the girl shows, but when you see them, it was startling. This is 1972 and 73, so it's a long time ago. But I think that the questions at that time, some of you were around then, you know, the women's movement was very outspoken in this period, and so sex work was very controversial. Yes. And these women were very defiant and felt that they no longer wanted to be dependent on the men around them. And I was, I guess, defiant that I wanted to go in and reveal the conditions that they were working within. So, you know, it's of a very particular time frame. It's interesting about the letters and why the letters are important in the vitrine. Of course, now you think about iPhones, you know, the materiality. I think one of the things we wanted to bring forth in this show is the behind-the-scenes material in many different examples of that. Sometimes it's obvious, it's a contact sheet. Sometimes it's little notes. In the carnival stripper vitrine, you see Lena writing me about whether or not she can edit the text that I've sent her that's going to represent her words in the book form that came from the sound. So it's trying to give a flavor. You can't give it all, but you're just giving a tease that there's more that lies behind in the process.
I mean, what's fascinating is that you even involve them in how they are going to be represented. It's not just coming, taking a picture, publishing a book, presented it to Magnum, which was your entrance to Magnum Photos agency at that time, but really being interested in what they have to say in their own representation. At the same time, the little Prince Street girls were coming into your dark room. How did they see on the other hand, the carnival strippers photograph being developed? You worked in your own dark room at that time, in Little Italy, where you still live.
Yeah, I still live in the same loft, and I told you that I think they were somewhat shocked because they were coming up to my loft to see a darkroom process, but to see themselves and they didn't know what to make of seeing the photographs I was printing of the carnivals. But that opened up conversations that they might never have had otherwise. This was anticipatory. These girls were, when I first met them, they were 8 to 10. You see them evolving into their teens, and a few of them getting married, and today they're 52 and 53, and we still see each other. Interestingly, I'm not photographing them, and that's part of the change in, they're photographing themselves and sending me their Instagram accounts, that kind of, so I'm updated in a very different way than I might be. At that time, it really seemed important to see every shift in their lives.
Yes, it's a lifelong friendship in a way. With them.
Which is harder with the carnival strippers. 2 of the women I was closest to died in the time since I made that work. So they received when we reprinted the book 30 years later, they did see that, but they're no longer here. So they're not, it was strange because last year, Luli knows, we went back into the box that I had packed up 50 years ago and hadn't even thought to look at again. And when I opened the box, I discovered that I'd made color, which I'd kind of forgotten. I was shooting 2 cameras, black and white and color. And because of the nature of very, very marginal conditions, I left the color to the daylight outside, but interiors were very difficult. So when I opened the box, Carnival Strippers Revisited became a project to really revisit the contact sheets and the transcriptions and what the whole process of making that work was at the time.
Is time important when looking back at photographs?
I think so. I mean, you're changing over time.
Yes.
And they're changing, and the question is, can you maintain the relationship with them? I'm looking again at this image of Justo, and Justo died 5 years ago, and someone sent me from their iPhone on his casket. He had the photograph I had given him of this image. Who would know? Who could imagine? So I think you can't always go back. You can't always sustain relationships. It's about what you hope for, what you can co-create.
And absolutely, in such a long career, like more than 5 decades, you are working with photography. The time might feel short, I would say, with somebody busy, so busy like you are, so involved, so really into your work with people, with communities, with photographs, of course. So I think time is also very relative, I would say. When we look at you, we cannot believe it, that it's true, with all the energy and all the still passion you have for your work.
Well, there's definitely more time behind me than there is ahead of me, I would say.
Wow.
So, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting because this show has traveled, as you know, and each time something else is revealed in the process of our installing and seeing relationships over time. It took me a while to see that. I think what I even said in the tour yesterday with the press, I suddenly was thinking about how Lando, which is in this first vitrine, and this visual genealogy that for some reason I thought was the way to represent the family histories. So you see, this is a small town in South Carolina where the mill was closing, and so like many small towns in other parts of the U.S. and I'm sure many other places, people start to migrate away, and so you feel the family that stayed and those that left. And we wanted to make a visual register of that. So you see the grandparents and then how many children they had, and then the next layer is how many of those children stayed and married and had children. And so we defined the whole community through this process. And it was done by teenagers collecting the family photographs, going to talk to their grandparents about what had happened to X or Y. So that is a process that 1974, and you know, what is it, 30 years later, 25 years later, I'm doing something similar in a very different world where I don't speak the language in Kurdistan. And when you get to the vitrine in Kurdistan, you'll see it's also fragments of history.
Yes.
Nothing's complete. Everything is part of a puzzle that people are kind of trying to hold on to against the erasure that occurs.
We're going to touch Kurdistan a little bit later, but there is still the moment in your career, 1978. You are sitting on an airplane towards Nicaragua. It's in terms of your work, it's a leap, like you said yesterday. Everything changed in terms of photography for you. You have become a member of Magnum 2 years earlier to that. But it was your personal mission, your personal decision to go to Nicaragua, to do your story about the revolution starting there. You were 30 years old at that time.
No, I turned 30 there. It's
Okay.
very significantly
Okay.
different.
Yes, yes,
Because
that's
when you
true.
turn an age that you think is significant, it registers, what am I doing here?
Exactly.
My friends aren't here, my family isn't here, why am I here?
I'm really
So,
interested in that. How do you recall that moment in your life? It must have been...
Well, it's important to say there wasn't a revolution that was visible yet. It was the kind of conflict that was evolving, that was being reported in text, not in images, in fact. So that's part of what drew me, what was absent, what I was imagining, not what I was seeing. And I think a lot about that now, because we see so much, our phones, we think we've seen, we think we know, and so does it motivate you in the same way? When there's an absence, it's very strong and it's like opening a door and you don't know what's behind it. So the real panic in that plane was not knowing what to do, because I'd never gone to a country where I knew nobody, I didn't speak the language. Suddenly I was going to land and I hadn't even thought, where am I going to stay? And the funniest story, I don't know that I told you that, but the person there was nobody at the airport to meet me because I didn't know anyone. And a woman came up to me and assumed I was from the Peace Corps, which our ambassador would appreciate, I know. And I wasn't from the Peace Corps, though in a way my heart was like what I think Peace Corps at that time represented. And she said, well, she didn't show up. Do you want her room? So I had this incredible good fortune. It was a $5 a night room, which was appropriate for the Peace Corps, and that's how I landed in Nicaragua. But, landing and then figuring out where you are and what's going on is a slower process.
But I still read in one of the Magnum's histories that you ran out of films. They send you new films, and they also send you a lens because they were a little bit afraid you are too close.
Yeah.
How brave were you? I mean, it probably was the very brave thing to go to Nicaragua, to go into the revolution. But I don't think your point was to be close as Robert Capa would need to be. I think you were really interested also in people, what is going on around the fight, the revolution, what's happening with just normal people.
Yeah, it's great you bring that story back, because I was shocked to get this zoom lens. It was like this big. It's kind of, I'm a 28 to 35 millimeter person, and I often think about what lens do you shoot. It says a lot about where you sit and how you look and where you are in relationship. So the more comfortable you are, the closer you are. So they didn't feel comfortable looking at how comfortable I was.
Yes.
But actually, I did use that lens at certain moments because I had no idea what it was going to be like to cover an insurrection, of course.
Yes. And of course you took this photo of Molotov Man, which is a significant also for the history of photography, because it shows how picture can circulate, how it can be recontextualized, how it can be used in different media, in different just object as well. We see a matchbox, we see a T-shirt, we see even a banknote. It has become the iconic photograph of the Nicaraguan revolution. how does it feel to see that people really took a photo, which is your authorial work, but still that they took it as their own slogan? In fact, it's who owns that picture?
Well, history owns it more than I do. The Nicaraguans who claim it. I'm going to remind you all. There's a postcard, and I hope you'll take it. SOS Nicaragua, which came to me as a Facebook page, and you'll see on the other side. So this is the Molotov man you'll discover on the walls there. And this is the last gesture of defiance against Somoza in 1979. And he fled the country, and the Sandinistas took power. And 40 years later, you'll also see a T-shirt, and that's the resistance of students fighting against the Ortega government. So he goes on with a life, and I wanted people to know, sometimes it's hard to put up photographs that seem final, and histories move on, and we don't always read the headlines, but these are difficult times still in Nicaragua.
Yes, and the photograph still has the life after. And
not all photographs have lives of their own, but this one certainly has. And in a different way than Che. We know Che. Yes. And of course there's one moment, there is a photograph of the Molotov man with Che, and he was very excited to be on a T-shirt with Che. But I was astounded to see him on a T-shirt on the 20th anniversary of the revolution. So you don't know where the photographs are going to go and what they're going to mean to people in time.
And sometimes it's good if you don't control them, right?
Well, you can't.
You can't.
It's reconciling that you can't, and then the question is, what can you make that reveals that process?
But you can look into this from a curious point of view, what actually is happening with photographs and how they are distributed, how they circulate, and how they are used, which I think this mediation installation really shows beautifully what can happen with a photograph and its life after. Staying with revolution, war, conflict, of course we have to touch the Kurdistan, which is again one of the main projects we can expose in your career. This exhibition is a retrospective. It doesn't show everything. It might not even show your favorite series. I think there are some which we could still mention as well, and they are not here. But they do have the red line of your career, so you can really follow what your main topics were. That's why the selection here. And we did leave out El Salvador, which was followed after Nicaragua. But Kurdistan it's the life project actually for you, because it still is ongoing. You still are engaged with Kurdish communities, with Kurdish diaspora all around the world, inviting them to contribute to this common history of people who don't have their own land. It started, of course, with you going to Kurdistan after, at the moment when the genocide in Iraq started.
Well, actually, hearing about the genocide, but really seeing the flight of Kurds, and I'm not sure how many of you or what you would have seen in Slovenia, but in 1991, there were 180,000 Kurds fleeing northern Iraq into Turkey at that time and into Iran on the borders to refugee camps. And no one really understood what had happened. There wasn't much reporting from within the country. People were reporting from the refugee camps. So I went into the area that they had just fled and discovered, along with others, the 4,000 villages that had been destroyed. So it became a mission to document the rubble on every hillside as much as I could. And that opened up questions mostly. I mean, why did I know nothing about who the Kurds were? I mean, maybe all of you do. But in 1991, other than reading headlines about a place that not only I'd never been, but I'd never read about, was part of the beginning of a process. And actually then I think the transition that's you see in this work is from what I can document, which is the evidence of the visual evidence of the Anfal, which was the genocide, attempted genocide of the Kurds. And I do that with a forensic team. Basically, Clyde Snow is very well known for Argentina, Chile, documenting the disappeared in Latin America. And he comes to document this region, these mass graves. So I work alongside him, and as we're doing that work, people begin to appear with their ID photographs of people who they've lost. And
it
that's,
goes far beyond photographic project. It has become actually history, writing the history of Kurdistan as well, from the archives, from including Western archives as well.
And imagining that photographs of the past could help me understand the present. So that was, I think, the motivation, seeing photographs and then thinking about where are the photographs that people make and take away with them. So I think this transition in my psychically was, I'm only one image maker at this moment in time, who's come before, and what's left, the traces of what they might have seen as missionaries, as colonial administrators, as ethnographers, etc. And so I'm really tracing where the photographs have gone, and that's what leads me to Western archives, the British Library, where there was a huge amount of documentation from the period of Mesopotamia, the Ottoman Empire. I wasn't allowed to get into certain kinds of archives, state archives of Turkey, of Iran. There's, as you mentioned, there is no national archive for the Kurds. So I felt like I was finding bits and pieces of a puzzle and trying to imagine. I think I say in the introduction, there's no box, like a normal puzzle, you get a box, you have the image, and if you don't have the image, you don't know how to begin except the little straight pieces, and you get all the straight pieces, but what's the picture? So when you're collecting photographs from a community who are bringing you bits and pieces, and you don't have the image, you're kind of blind, you're going blind, and each piece is very precious, and is a gift, and it opens up other kinds of exchanges.
So to build an archive which they don't have, you established this project Aka Kurdistan, and it's a website which is the same since 90s and still active and still working, where people can contribute their own stories. Kurdish people, they can bring up their stories, their photographs, they can share. And as well, as you will see on this exhibition, we have like hundreds of booklets from the workshops you did around the world with Kurdish people.
Yeah.
What is...
The only detail there is that books are fixed. And so to understand, in my mind, as much as we pulled all of the material I could possibly find together into a book, which became kind of like a family album across all the boundaries and borders of Kurdish communities, including the diaspora. The more complicated question was, so it looks like the authoritative history, which it never was intended to be. So the idea of the internet, that book was published in 97. By 1998, we had the beginnings of an internet where you could make exchanges, visual exchanges, not just data. So in 1998, I was starting to imagine this cyberspace being a space where collecting could continue, which lasted only a certain period. And the story map was the extension to make it really to an audience such as yourselves. I mean, my hope and the people who contributed these stories is that someone will pick up this little book, which is a very small story of a memory they might have of their homeland or the difficulty of exile. And it's a very partial, it's a gesture, it's an invitation, it's a contribution, but it's not anything more than, the beginning of a dialogue, really.
Of course, I see you are humble about that work, but I still think that you have some really beautiful stories also to share from people who worked with you, who you work with. Today you mentioned that there was a person who found her own sister on the exhibition. Could you expose maybe some story from the workshops, from experiencing people actually, which gives you the feeling that this is something worth doing?
Well, the story I told Maria at lunch was that there's a woman you'll see in the vitrine called Margaret George, and Margaret was a Syrian Christian. So she was allowed to fight with the men, the Peshmerga in Kurdistan, unlike the Muslim women. Now that's not true in Turkey. The PKK does have women integrated, but this was in Iraq in the 60s. And Margaret, you will see, photographed with Barzani, the great leader of Kurdistan in that period, and with her sister, and both dressed as a Peshmerga and dressed in her, kind of traditional clothing. She's the girl that was discovered when the show about Kurdistan went to a small museum outside of Seattle, Washington. And Margaret had been killed in Kurdistan, and his sister had left the country before that. So that was a really startling connection when her sister discovered in the vitrine the pictures that you might see and the memories of Margaret at that time. But the workshops generate other surprises. I was very happy, I think we all three were, that almost no one in the masterclass used their iPhone during the 2 solid days from 10 to 6. Nobody was but I gave a workshop in Frankfurt, and they were just in that early period when the Germans had welcomed the Kurdish diaspora, and it was really an open door. And we had a show about Kurdistan there, and there was a young guy. So they brought some people from refugee camps and some people who were already settled and had been in Germany for a long period of time. There are something like 1 million Kurds in Germany, so it's a huge community. And there were maybe 10 or 12 people. It's always an open invitation if you want to come. If you come, you bring a story, or you bring a photograph, and you maybe discover a story you want to share. And there's no obligation. Sometimes people come and don't stay, or they bring their daughters because they think their daughters can tell better stories. Anyway, this young man was sitting there in the circle of the group on his cell phone constantly, and it was really irritating. And I, of course, could not speak directly, and we had double translation because I don't speak German. So between saying in English to the German translator who said something to the Kurdish translator, who then said something to this young boy, and they basically said, "What are you looking at?" And the most moving thing was that he said, "I'm looking for photographs. I don't have any. The only ones I can find are of my destroyed village that are on the internet." And so you'll see that little book. He's sharing what he found, which is so this idea that you go from what we all value, personal family albums. Some of us have them now. We have them only on our phones. Most of the diaspora and exile community, that's what they bring with them, and he didn't even have that. So he was researching Afrin, the town that had been destroyed on the border of Turkey and Syria at that time.
Only imagine that his personal memories might be there somewhere.
Triggered by precisely that, and that's what he then wrote a story about, being a student leader, being forced to leave, knowing no one in Germany, and just beginning on this long journey, really, a long journey of waiting and what will happen next.
Yes. Violence, for sure, is the topic you are touching with a lot of empathy, a lot of understanding, and because I see you believe it's important to bring it forward, to expose it the way that we all can think about it, we all can reflect on it. But there's an interesting moment when you also gave space to violence, to pain, and it's a completely different topic, with S&M Club. That goes into voluntary pain. And again, thinking back to carnival strippers, sex industry topic, which is one of the topics you worked on. But how does it feel, like seeing a lot of pain with people and then picturing the pain which is voluntary, which people decide to to cause to themselves. It's a very subtle, I think, approach to look into this, and you have to be, of course, very sensitive about to understand that.
I think so. You'll find this work. It's called Pandora's Box, and it's kind of hidden, as Pandora's boxes are, in a kind of the cave in the second room. And I was explaining to Maria that it's hard to give a full context for that work. But working for a decade in Latin America, the interrogation cells, the prison cells, the stories of torture, the evidence of torture, the exhumations, probably all of this were the conditions that I carried with me into this setting. And this is a setting that is by choice. Both the mistress, the dominatrix, obviously is given a code word. The person who invites the violence, if you could use the word violence, whether it's a whip or whatever tool, they choose, and they choose the limits, and they choose the degree, and they are also in a position to say, mercy, mistress, and it stops. So from my own psyche, and photographing those cells where I imagine the dynamic of what happens, I guess I was, and this is in the mid-90s, this is right in the middle of doing the Kurdish archival work, I couldn't turn away. I felt I had to. This is before Abu Ghraib, actually. This is before we see those photographs, collectively, publicly. But these are private settings, and there's the tension between them. I just felt I had to both witness, listen, in a different way than the kind of witnessing I'd done before. It's unsettling.
But it's human. It's human.
Well, we're surprising, but to understand the human, I wouldn't say it's a desire for pain, but there is some search to understand and to have toleration and to tolerate pain. What does it mean that somebody chooses to tolerate pain? It's a very different kind of pain that people tolerate in domestic violence work.
Yes.
And whether or not they're tolerating or they are trapped, the work there goes back to a more common and comfortable vocabulary of evidential work, I would say, for me. And that's, again, this is all work I'm doing within 3 or 4 years of each other. So these themes are kind of woven within my psyche. The evidence that the police are collecting on domestic violence is, of course, leading to trials and trying to create laws that protect women.
And that's the last room of this exhibition, where we brought 2 series, the archives of abuse.
Yeah.
What you are saying, the police archives, which you used also to create posters for the bus stops to raise awareness of home violence, of domestic violence.
For actually a crisis line, which San Francisco, at the time, a very innovative police force, was trying to bring broader public attention to how it was not as well known as we might think we've heard about today. This is 1991.
Yes, it's
so again, it's 30 plus years ago. And a number of years, almost 2 decades later, when I go to do the work in the UK, a room of their own, which is in the same spaces in the back, these are women, these are networks that have been created since that period of time. Networks of homes where women can find emergency rooms that they can stay in as long as they need to be there, and then hopefully re-enter communities.
It's actually the only series, Room of Their Own, is the only series where there is absence of people. There are their rooms, they tell everything about people using them or living in them, maybe temporarily. What does it create that emptiness, that absence of persons who you actually do not have to take photos of to tell their stories. Is that something what you deliberately did, or was it the need of the project to do it like that?
The only, in the book, if you see the book, which you can't turn the pages in the vitrine, but we did workshops, not like the masterclass workshop, but workshops that led to a number of collages. And if you look at the video, you'll see some of the collages they were making. They told their stories through collage, essentially. And then when they invited me to their rooms, it was very clear their room was like a mirror of their life. And so protecting their identity was very important, protecting the place where I was making photographs. It's anonymous in the community to protect the women that are staying there. So those were really the essential reason. And they only become present in the book when they are ready to return. And they never return to their own original communities. They return to a different part of the country.
Yes.
So if they feel ready for the return, they then take on a new identity in a number of ways.
So it's also protection. Maybe we can touch a project which is not presented here, but you told me about when you first visited us here. The project from Morocco, from Marrakesh. I find it really amusing how you actually examine the value of the photographs you were taking. You were there with other Magnum photographers on a mission in 2013, I think. To picture Marrakesh. I mean, this is one of these Magnum projects which are collective projects, which you do, a project on agreement. But for you, that was a chance, an opportunity to flip it a little bit again.
Well, actually, now that I've been here, I think we made a mistake. We should have brought that part of the show.
It's a beautiful one, but maybe
because
we can share
it was quite an experience. I mean, yes, Magnum every once in a while, as in this case, 5 of us were invited by a group to work with a group of photographers in Morocco. So it was going to be a dialogue with emerging talent in Morocco, and it was extremely challenging. It was an open commission for us to work for a week. The photographers that we were working, they were working with us. They were seeing us work, and within a week we were exhibiting. I don't know how many of you do that. It's one thing to have to make a photograph for a magazine that represents whatever. To do a body of work that you're going to put on a wall that's going to be public within 5 days, 6 days is pretty stressful.
Yes.
So my colleagues at the time were Abbas Michal Sabotsky from South Africa, Jim Goldberg from San Francisco, Mark Power from England. And we had never worked together, and we all worked differently. And
Abbas, I think.
Abbas was one of them, And the real point is, when you're working with photographers, one thing, actually, with Method, we were talking about when you're all photographing the protest, you're elbowing each other and trying to get the best angle, and there's a competitive environment. But of course it's competitive with the 5 of you. Each are supposed to find your distinctive theme. And so day by day, as the one woman in that particular group, I was more and more paralyzed each day. And each day they came back with more and more photographs that they'd made about any number of things. And every day, the days gone by, and there was a curator, a wonderful curator, Simon from Cameroon, who was working with us. Every day he would say, "So, what did you bring?" And I said, "Nothing, nada." And every day went by, the days, and he said, by 5 days we have to see, because we have to print, because we're going to open the show on Monday. And I was like, oh. So the 5 working days of the week went by, and I had nothing. And I really was paralyzed, because I felt this pressure in Morocco of the impact of tourism. And I'm not sure if it's quite the same as tourism in Ljubljana, but the women of the spice market, of course, did they or did they not want to have photographs made? And every tourist was not asking, but making photographs. So on the sixth day, Saturday, I just said, what about an open studio? If they want to make a photograph, I'll make a portrait of them. And if they don't, I'll give them the money that they really probably want instead of the photograph. And that was the question, 20 dirhams or a photograph. And so I wrote 20 dirhams, which was what it cost to go to a local studio and get your portrait made for a passport or a photo. And I got Fuji to give me a little printer, and we printed out. And they had to decide before they saw the photograph. So that was the one thing. So they came, we were right in the middle of the spice market in Morocco, and they either chose to come forward and be photographed and then keep it or give it to me and loan it to me to put on the exhibit on Monday. And so what's really interesting is the photographs that were on the wall were the photographs they rejected, and they took the money instead. And then I left the money on the walls of the women that had, so you see it was reverse. I had the money, they had the photograph, or the reverse. And actually it got at exactly what my paralysis had been. I didn't know if a photograph had any value to them at all, be it 20 dirham or more or less.
Yeah,
so, I do think that, when you try to find a form that reflects in some way the questions you're maybe asking or inviting.
Yes, it's a good examination, and I think it also gives that vulnerability of a photographer like you, I think it's interesting for us to hear that you also have your creative crisis when you don't know what to do when somebody tells you do something. So this is also, I think, for any young photographer, it's kind of, okay, it happens to somebody with 50 years of career as well. And going out with a camera, it can be frightening for a photographer, I think. I see this on our workshops sometimes as well. They go out with a task and now they have to work, so it's really confrontational.
Well, it's that unknowing, living with the unknowing, the uncertainty, and trying to work one's way through the questions. Yes. Try not to panic. But when you're offered, it seems like the dream of all dreams.
Yes.
And
yes. But let me open up maybe the last question, which is probably one that you don't like, besides how you started your career and maybe what's the difference between color and black and white photography. You are a woman. How difficult, of course, it is for a woman to devote life to photography, or how pleasant it is, or what a challenge it is, or how much sacrifice it is.
I can't believe you're going to ask me this question, Maria. Maria is about to do a show, she told us at lunch, about the women of photographers of Slovenia who've been hidden all these decades.
Yes.
So you're a woman curator making a very important decision, and I'm indebted to the woman curator who proposed this show, Marta Gili, at the Japon, 5 or so years ago. So, I feel very fortunate to have all of you here, not just listening, but looking and thinking and bringing your own thoughts to the work you're going to do. I think that's what women do. They invite everyone around the table, I hope.
Exactly. So, around the fire.
Around the fire.
To host.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, thank you.
Susan, thank you so much for letting us be your host, your guests on the exhibition you are bringing to us. It is a beautiful opportunity to think about all the topics you brought into our communities. Your contribution you are giving to the society in general. Thank you so much.
But thank you to Ljubljana. You have no idea how excited we have been in these days to learn as much as we have, including Luli, who's from Argentina, who discovered how many Slovenians are there that she's going to go back and come to know. So we've learned a lot from all of you already. Thank you.
Now, if there is some really burning questions, we can have one maybe. Would we? No?
One.
We are already running late. One question. If there is one really burning question, we will. accepted. You know, Slovenians usually don't ask questions.
Oh, that's good. So you invite them to ask questions because you know they won't ask any. Perfect. I'll be here if you really want to ask something. I'm going to be floating around.
That's also
Feel free.
true.
Feel free.
Okay. Thank you so
Thanks.
much.
Thanks. I don't believe you asked me that question. We're survivors, I think. So we can get that